We must speak the truth about terror. Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories, malicious lies that attempt to shift the blame away from the terrorists themselves.
Take your own advice.
What happens? I tell you what happens. Blam!
I have a window that looks directly at the World Trade Center, and I saw...
No delusion!
Shit's getting way too complicated for me.
Welcome to the AnteDote. This is Greg McCarran.
And this is Jeremy Rothkushel.
All right, so it is currently Wednesday evening, June 21st, and this is our first time recording in at least somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks, I think. It's been close to 4 weeks, and we keep talking about, Jeremy, the uncharted waters we keep finding ourselves in, at least like in our modern history as far as our political system goes. And the hits just keep on coming when it comes to uncharted waters, as now we have something that will be news to absolutely no one who listens to this podcast. The first federal indictment of a former U.S. president, of course, that being Donald Trump. This is a follow-up on the New York indictment, but this is this is just another of the what I keep calling the uncharted waters we keep finding ourselves in as a nation, and we keep talking about how the long-term problems that we've had that we find ourselves in as a nation, as a system that go long. The roots are very long, and I think are pretty well documented in a number of places. But there is no doubt that there has been an escalation in terms of the trajectory of things, as Donald Trump is fond of saying, in ways we've never seen before, since what we call the 11/9 operation and all that comes with it. So we'll get into this most recent example of uncharted waters as far as our particular American political system goes, and the ramifications of it, which I do think affect geopolitics, affect a lot of areas globally and not just domestically here, as far as what happens in DC and what happens here with our politics, and obviously the ramifications of it. We'll get into maybe a more of a macro level in terms of, I have some things I want to discuss about the going a bigger picture from what I see as a bigger picture of some of the aspects surrounding this, things we've talked about before, and then following up with further thoughts with time and just what I've been thinking, that elaborating on things I've talked about in the past with some new terrain and ground in that. We'll also talk about a few other things as well, the Robert F. Kennedy Jr. presidential campaign and some things that are going on there. And we're going to go back to some topics we've covered in the past as far as it goes to the persona of John Mark Dugan, and then also maybe even getting into the latest news with Paul Singer and Sam Alito and what that might mean. I think we're going to likely go a few parts with this. This won't just be a one-part recording here. We'll cover this in a few, probably 2 or 3, maybe is what I'm thinking, recordings. But we're going to cover these topics and over the next couple of recordings here. And I guess first, do you have any general thoughts you want to share on the state of this before we get into more of the specifics of what we want to cover?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big deal, obviously, and we were anticipating that something was coming out of Jack Smith's office, especially around the boxes. They're my boxes, the most beautiful.
They have his
boxes.
love letters to Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, and all my golfing sweaters, and I just needed to move them around for a while. But really,
greatest golfer ever.
I mean, the people are comparing this to the Kennedy assassination, and this is really this saddest moment in this country's history, and all of that kind of stuff. And meanwhile, it's a fairly straightforward.
No one's had it worse than Trump other than Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, don't tell Ryan Dawson. And other than, maybe John Kennedy, in terms of how it was on TV, or it was videotaped. At least it was videotaped for on TV many years later, after it was filtered through the 33rd degree Scottish Freemason Abraham Zapruder on through people like C.D. Jackson at Time Life in relationship to psychological warfare, even chemical warfare commander, then to certain commanding heights in terms of U.S. Elements of the CIA, and even aspects of that film that look like to have been altered at a special Kodak lab, right? But all of this in terms of the total public nature of this and the nature of the allegations being public. And if you go look at Jack Smith's public statement, it was very even-handed and very prosecutorial in the best fashion, I would say. Was not didn't seem very grandstandy, and although Trump again tried to attack Smith as, especially via his wife, as some kind of he's their Trump hating leftist. His wife made a beautiful film about Michelle dog whistling Michael Obama or whatever. And of course, that whole canard, fraudulent, approach to Michelle Obama is continues to rear its head in the background here. But what's very interesting is it is the case that Jack Smith's wife, as we pointed out, she's a documentary filmmaker named Katie Shavigny. And she did make a film called Becoming in 2020 about Michelle Obama. But what we focused on that I think is way more to the core of what's actually going on here and what's being dog whistled by the American security services, really, in terms of the nature of this indictment. Because, by the way, this is apparently on behalf of multiple agencies. The Pentagon has signed off on aspects of the documents being a threat. The CIA, the NSA. So this is really a prosecution of a former president based on what looks to be some kind of coalition of the U.S. national security state saying this is gone too far. And by the way, you don't mess with the librarians. NARA, the National Archivists, right? These are the national librarians, and they played it real cool with him. They tried to handle this quietly, but the thing is, we've seen it. Greg, you and I have seen this firsthand. Is like if you want to be either in bed on the side of anybody in terms of American public institutions around things like the actual protections, the core political protections of the First Amendment, you do want to be in bed with the American librarians and their associations and their commitments. And we even saw this, not just obviously in terms of the Kansas City Public Library arrest case, but going back to even the immediately post 9/11 period in terms of I think it was the New Hampshire Four or something like that. But the first real serious group to challenge the aspects of the Patriot Act and these national security letters that you couldn't even talk. You had to be basically under some kind of secrecy agreement, even though you never signed any kind of secrecy oath, was the librarians. And so ultimately Trump, there's a lot of karmic resonance here. This guy who sort of refuses to read books, sort of thumbs his nose at, the readers. We got a reader here, this kind of thing. That's how he plays the pretend populace. And it really came back that it was the national librarians who ultimately bit him in the ass. That's what it looks like to me. And so,
Yes,
and it comes down to it that this part of Jack Smith's wife, Katie Shavigny's documentary background, probably the key film that she made, I think, in relationship to what's actually going on here, is a film from 2018 titled Dark Money that we've mentioned before, which has an interesting combination of topics. It's based around the era of post Citizens United and Super PAC money and the power of Super PAC money to sort of turn Lady Liberty on her head. That's actually the cover of the film Dark money is the Lady Liberty upside down. And I think that's what that picture is. Or maybe it might be the Capitol, sort of a combination of a Capitol with Lady Liberty turned upside down, representing how the state capitals are under assault by this dark money, especially post Citizens United. Obviously, that ties directly in to the Trump years, and then obviously this ProPublica story coming out that you mentioned.
And Citizens United was right at the beginning. I think the first month of 2010, which is at the height of the I think much more artificial and much more astroturfed Tea Party movement. So big time there.
That's a good point. And right, and then the whole scenario about the Lois Lerner, right? Was that her name? And the IRS controversy, and really
that followed. Yeah, that was post Citizens United. That whole controversy there,
and that was all hearkening towards what we really saw being rolled out in terms of the apex of the 11/9 operation, and the amount of dirty money and even foreign dark money that is still really not been fully accounted for in terms of micropayments and covert bundling and then all of these covert foreign influence operations via the purchase of political power and really political technology and influence operations. It plays into all of this, I think. And so we'll include the Wikipedia link to the Dark Money film. It's interesting. It goes to Montana and talks about, starts with the Anaconda Copper Mining Company. Real deep background there in terms of mines. It includes, families such as the Rothschilds showing up around the turn of the into the 19th, into the 20th century, the Rockefellers, then obviously even the question of the Chilean coup, the first 9/11, if you want to call it that. And so there's a whole bunch there that I think is there's a reason why Trump doesn't want to attack Jack Smith based on his wife being a dark money hater. She's a dark money hater. She's woke. She hates dark money. So that's not where he's going. He's going with the Michael Obama. I won't say it, but everyone else knows it. But that's what I'm saying. That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
it's another variation of, I'd be up here to talk about taxes all day and no one responds. But then as soon as I bring up the transgenders, you didn't even know what that was 5 years ago, and you go crazy.
Yeah, it was interesting. Trump actually looked like Trump was actually listening to the AnteDote almost. Like very soon after we recorded about how DeSantis has basically nothing to say other than woke, anti-woke, Florida where's woke goes to die, all of that. Trump even seemed to attack DeSantis on his overuse of wokeism and all of that. But then meanwhile just drops right into actually waging the culture war and using the culture war politics.
Yeah, you couldn't have the culture war ramped up to where it is now without Trump. So
yeah. So all right, so there's we'll see how this evolves, this aspect of the Jack Smith prosecution of Trump under multiple charges, including mishandling of classified documents, obstructing justice, and making false statements. And actually, it talks about a conspiracy, but so far it looks like the only named conspirator is this Trump aide Walt Nauta, who's isn't interesting. Seems to pop up in the White House during the Obama years as a chef. Seems to be born in Guam, a military family, I think, or he maybe then enters in the military and is sort of seen all throughout the military, and then is picked up by Trump in a holdover from the Obama administration, then becomes sort of Trump's next generation Schiller kind of, coffee qua security kind of boy, that kind of thing. And so he's then Nauta is implicated in moving the boxes and all of this. And I believe it talks about Trump, moving the boxes on planes. There's a lot going on there. We still don't really know the full extent of what all of this was for. And I just did notice that very quickly, the usual characters, such as the Maggie Habermans, for example, and following up with the Howard Rubenstein PR operation that we identified all throughout the Trump years of these quote unquote access attack journalism or something like that. I think Maggie Haberman's role at the New York Times scenario where it's a pseudo attack, but it's really a controversializing, as maybe Sarah Kendzior would point out, in terms of the long-term education of Donald Trump as a public political character by the Roy Cohn operation in terms of controversializing, turning corruption into controversy. And so that was Maggie Haberman's role throughout the Trump years. And she seemed to get out ahead of this. And this whole slew of these commentators who look to be sort of, for Trump, he got himself in trouble, not because of some kind of being some kind of a multi-handled foreign intelligence asset for probably multiple different nations, some of them identified as hostile, others identified as quote unquote allies. That it was not that Trump had got himself in trouble. It was that he was just egotistical and narcissistic and wanted to have, sort of show people things. And he's just, the problem was, as Steve Pachenik would be, he's a self-aggrandizer or something like that. That was the problem here, not the 11/9 operation issue, but the Trump is an aggrandizer, reminding me of the whole narrative around Bush, the quote-unquote clown, rather than the whole 9/11 operation. So we're seeing that whole thing repeated over and over again.
That's a good point. And of course, it is true, but when you deal with the narcissism and you deal with those personality traits, you have to deal with it in the context of this obvious short-term and long-term history, obviously, of being of these very compromised, very corrupt multinational intersection between quote-unquote legitimate business and just straight up an organized crime interest. And that's not what these polished PR representatives do. They'll throw out, they'll focus on the personality, and maybe in some ways somewhat accurate, but then also somewhat not inaccurate, while omitting the real serious motives and reasons for culpability that need to be focused on. They give you the full picture.
Yeah, and another parallel analogy for this would be something about the way that Nancy Pelosi would talk about Trump to the press and why they weren't going to impeach him early on, or it's just Trump's a bad guy and we know what he's like.
He's not worth it.
Yeah, he's not worth. Thank you. That was the phrase. He's not worth it. So it's sort of like a minimizing of the person, a sort of attack the straw man, back to the Bush the clown kind of scenario.
If she had a Twitter in 2006, she could have said Bush wasn't worth it.
Right, and she would have, and that was the crucial role that she's the big. If there's one sort of continuity of agenda operator in terms of the cover-ups of these major, globally implicative operations taking place in the United States from 9/11 to 11/9, the actual political cover-up, which combines sort of government operations and what is going to be investigated with in the American House, but also to the way that it's talked about in public, to the press and to the to the American people. You got to say it's Nancy Pelosi is maybe the crucial political operator for the entirety of the 21st century in helping cover up the depth of this global criminality and these deep operations from 9/11 to 11/9. And so the parallel, I think, is that Nancy Pelosi, Trump's not worth it, versus the Bandy Lee, for example. Let's look at Trump and why he's dangerous, but let's do it in a academic fashion, in a authentically psychiatric fashion, but in a criminal and national security fashion. And then this is why over the many years we continued to highlight the question of intelligence, counterintelligence, what makes a good asset. That old school acronym that I think has now been updated to a new acronym, but that old school acronym of MICE, mice, right? How do you cultivate your counterintelligence mice running around, doing what you want for your political operations and experiments on the wheels of the public mind? That M standing for money, right? I standing for ideology, C standing for compromise. That could also be corruption. You could also, sort of corruption can be turned into compromise, and then ego, right? And so the Maggie Habermans of the world want to reduce everything to just ego, while also putting a nice firewall over the egoic implications of foreign intelligence operations cultivating a long-term asset. And in this case, it's obvious that I would imagine that Haberman is not just helping cover up the deep Russian operation here, but very much the Israeli component of the operation, which I believe is now going to begin to show itself, although it's not directly implicated in terms of the Jack Smith indictment, and it's actually there doesn't seem to be tons specific in terms of what who these were serving specifically, although there's a lot of chatter and some evidence toward this idea of the trade-off with Saudi Arabia. We know about Kushner and the $2 billion. We also know about this recent PGA merger with the LIV and the Saudis taking over golf and the whole thing with Trump. But in general, it seems to be that these characters, the Maggie Habermans, mainly serve to cover up the entirety of intelligence and counterintelligence, national security, global security implications in general. And that serves many different national characters, I would say. But we pointed out that, the freak out of someone like Mark Levin, as you pointed out to me, Greg, Mark Levin was a former never Trumper who became a convert of some sort, some sort of like a Lindsey Graham type, actually, from the media sphere. The fact that he really did almost have an aneurysm when he went on Sean Hannity and said, "This is war, and all of that. And it's clear that when we did our program on the Talpiot program, how it works back, I think that was 2018 maybe, that we highlighted that Netanyahu came on Mark Levin's show, Life, Liberty, Levin. That's wonderful. I forget how Bibi put it, but that was an indicator that this was a key mouthpiece for the Netanyahu network. The fact that it was the first time that Netanyahu had really laid out the nature of this long-term military intelligence planning.
It's like I think he's an important connecting point between the direct Netanyahu network and what we call the Hillary Clinton coined term vast right-wing conspiracy.
Right, and that's how it then fits into the assets in the United States, and specifically in terms of Netanyahu, you might call the Sayanim assets of Netanyahu replete throughout politics and the media. And so the marker of a Mark Levin melting down around this and trying to agitate for war, really, he's saying this political war at the very least, but really dog whistling, deeper kind of January 6th insurrectionist kinds of vibes in relationship to this, is, I think, indicative that the Netanyahu network is not pleased by these kinds of moves, even though they're not directly quite yet exposed by it in the public sphere. But I would then point out that this now released ProPublica article really calling into question Alito directly. But not only Alito, but Alito directly in his relationship with Paul Singer and this trip that was financed, and obviously at the epicenter of this, as always, is the Federalist Society. Leonard Leo, now more recently of Barry Side, donating over $1 billion to this network. Deep, background in between China and Israel, Barry Side, and so that's really what's being, for those with eyes to see and ears to hear. That's what this ProPublica article is beginning to point to, is this Paul Singer network. He's the dawn. He becomes the institutional dawn of the startup nation. He starts Startup Nation Central in the immediate wake of Dan Senior's and
Saul Singer.
Saul Singer's book, Startup Nation, The Story of Israel's Economic Miracle, with a new foreword by Shimon Peres, by the way, right? And that puts it right in the heart of Isabel Maxwell territory also. And by the way, Saul Singer is not apparently related familially to Paul Singer. It's interesting, though, the Saul and the Paul of the Singer clans here in terms of startup nation. But one thing I remember from this book, though, is that I think it turned out that the first company that went public after 9/11 in terms of New York Stock Exchange, I think it was an Israeli company that I believe was called Pillcam, or that's what the product was. It was a very small camera that could be swallowed as a pill, so that doctors and probably with an Israeli military intelligence back end, maybe literally in this case, in terms of the human intestines, would have some insight into the inside of human beings, and all marketed as just a grace. Tikkun olam for things like cancer or something like that, So that's this book became then the jump off point for Paul Singer to do Startup Nation Central, and then really start pushing in terms of this technology transfer and setting up these sort of smart city Israeli military intelligence, experiments in terms of New York City, and all of that is right in the background of ProPublica exposing Paul Singer and Alito, especially around the fact that Paul Singer had cases of interest in front of Alito, and he never even mentioned this trip on forums that he should have, and never recused himself. And one of the big one, I think, was this Argentina scenario when the Argentinian currency collapsed, and Singer was amongst other vulture capitalists who bought things up on pennies on the dollar, and then when others forgave Argentina some of their debt as they were trying to recover, Singer went hardline and took the the government of Argentina to the U.S. Supreme Court in front of his basically paid asset, Sam Alito, and probably others, if you think about it, as the Federalist Society more generally, and got all of his money, I think, from Argentina. And so that then hooks into the whole Naomi Klein shock doctrine, the relationship of vulture capitalists, the shock to sort of economic shocks. And remember that second to last chapter in Naomi Klein's book about losing the peace incentive that directly deals with the ramping up of the Israeli security sector and Israel becoming a counterterrorism security mall, cyber mall for the world, and especially in a post 9/11 context. And very interesting information there, even if Naomi Klein, as is her perpetual wont, does everything she can to deny that she believes in any quote unquote conspiracy theories about who's actually doing the shocking. And as I pointed out, that whole idea of shock, right? Shock therapy, a lot of that comes back not just to sort of what we overtly are aware of in terms of the background of shock therapy in psychiatry, but specifically mind control psychiatry, right? MK Ultra psychiatry, where you don't wait for someone to get struck by lightning or to stumble and stick their finger in an electric socket so that you can then use that shock moment to then pattern their mind, control their mind. No, you do the shocking. So the question is, who's doing the shocking? But meanwhile, there is an interesting overlap here, I think, between that losing the peace incentive chapter of Naomi Klein's book that directly, I think, implicates Israeli military intelligence at a very high level in terms of especially the economic interests of one Prime Minister Netanyahu, in their interests in the generation of what Rahm Emanuel might call a generated crisis of 9/11, and all that was then amplified and escalated after 9/11. And so now what we're seeing is the unpacking of the maybe culture war catalyst. Talked about 9/11 as the big wedding. That was one of the code words, apparently, of intercepts, I think, from the Mohammed Atta cell that was 9/11 was being talked about as the big wedding. I then see another deeper meaning behind it, as actually not, think about it less as Taliban weddings that are being bombed in Afghanistan, and think of it more as a tactical nuclear wedding, shotgun wedding type, for the sort of closing of the deal of the special relationship of the United States and Israel. And so then I think, in just finishing up here, I think we can then see the 11/9 operation as the invisible landscape, the more invisible landscape, or the global culture war tower, as we've talked about more and more, the terror war tower, the culture war tower, that the 11/9 operation and the Trump operation, and even more globally Brexit and all of the things that are now have aligned certain aspects of the GOP and the MAGA movement with these Likud and these the Bolsonaro folks, and Orbanites, the CPAC's favorite guy, Orban, and then obviously into Putin's Russia as the savior of the Western world in terms of countering globo homo and all of this kind of thing.
Right. It's absurd. And do you want to? It will be interesting going forward. We'll have to come back to this whole Singer scenario things, because I think there's something in terms of bigger picture. I think this certainly brings together the interests of, say, a Paul Singer, who I do not fancy as like a I don't sense there's, I don't know, maybe there is somewhere deep in his background, but I don't sense there is too much of like a Russian element with him. I mean, just like he's not a MAGA. I don't think he's in bed really with the MAGA culture warrior interest either, but it at least shows like that there is a continuity of gaining the benefit from the judicial overhaul that comes with something like 11/9.
Yes, very, very good point. And as it more and more looks like the Tikva fund that we identified as crucial to this big symbolic move of Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro in Jerusalem in recent months seems to be really at the core, really, continuing to look more and more to be at the core of linking together the judicial attack in Israel to the judicial attack in the United States. And obviously the judicial attack in the United States is way longer term. It's way bigger money. It's way more subtle and massaged over many years. But this, of course, was one thing that we always harped on, that this was the lubrication for those that were uncomfortable for Trump, the publicly destabilizing or the publicly delegitimizing aspect of Trump, sort of ripping the off the face mask off the apocalypse of the American empire, as some on the left might have sort of called it, or why Trump was then targeted is because he just took the mask off the empire. For all these, for those kinds of folks, like in terms of who were uncomfortable with that destabilizing aspect of Trump on the right, it was this Federalist Society anchor point in terms of remember the judges, remember the Supreme Court, remember our bigger issues here. And that's, of course, Mike Pence represents the sort of ceiling of that deal. And you got to sort of see, I think you got to see Mike Pence as like the sort of Sarah Palin kind of type. But also, I made this point, earlier today when we were talking, Greg, about how I see Pence as more of the symbolic, crucial dog whistle to the religious right to at least give cover to this obviously morally compromised narcissist and sort of anti-God kind of figure, or believing he is God kind of figure in Trump. For the evangelical right to be able to then come into the MAGA movement and support the 11/9 operation behind Trump. That Pence represented a bringing into the fold what we called the spiritual compromise, really,
Yep.
of the American Christian right. But I said that he's not so much like the Dick Cheney kind of vice president, where he was actually operative so much in the like Cheney was in the 9/11 operation, apparently. But more and more, as we begin to sort of see 11/9 as less of a, as an actual like physical attack like 9/11 was, and more of like the big wedding of the global culture war attack, then you can actually see Mike Pence as maybe really as like a Dick Cheney kind of vice presidential nominee, while also being this symbolic Sarah Palin type.
I like that, and regardless of what Mike Pence's real, what he really is like as a person, outside of like this persona that is made up of him as the public presentation of him as the overly devout evangelical family values guy who will not be seen individually with any woman outside of his wife and his mother and all that. The devout. I think that prior to when you're first selling Trump as the Republican nominee on a national stage, prior to all of the spiritual warfare that took place with the bringing in of the literal demonic evil around the Clintons and all this that was so key in the immediate lead up to the election. But in that early period, it really solidified more like Trump as like this spiritual force that was going to stop the wickedness of the deep state and all of their tentacles through bringing in Hillary Clinton as president to end the country and all of that. That you had to have a Mike Pence type person there to early on, I think, for the evangelical audiences, because this as the counterbalance to this obvious degenerate figure. And of course that didn't change, but also several months later, like there's been this all of this spiritual propaganda warfare put out there that hadn't really been done yet in the actual general election time frame, but in the aftermath of the primaries, in steps Mike Pence is like this perfect person, I think, that kind of had to be there for the initial soothing of the evangelical crowd, who I think prior to all of like this media onslaught of like these things that ultimately led to where we're at now with QAnon and with the political opponents are literally spiritually wicked and want to literally target and murder your children and all of this. That there had to be a early soothing over. Mike Pence was the perfect figure for that. And it's now interesting that Pence is actively opposing Trump in the presidential primary, while also being showing himself, at the very least, I call it profiles in cowardice with his the way he's so mealy mouthed and weak sauce around like people who put his life in danger at the urging and the behesting of their would be king Donald Trump on with everything surrounding the 2020 election and January 6th and all of that. But it's instructive, I think, with Mike Pence in this as this persona. I do want to harken back to that here when in a second. But I did want to say that this was that Pence is a key figure in that regard. And then, of course, it was also a major move. It was the Paul Manafort wing that brought in Pence. And this would have been kind of a wedding between the overt multinational foreign interests and the domestic Council for National Policy right-wing power structure interests that converged together around Trump. And then Pence gets brought in by this wing, and then the passing of the baton from Manafort, the maybe multinational organized crime interest, directly to the direct domestic interest of Steve Bannon and the Council for National Policy, and bringing in the vast right wing conspiracy, as it's called, that many of whom were not for Trump until it was obvious he was going to get the nomination, and really effectively, I have to say, you have to hand it in some ways. Like, it was very effectively done, I think, and it was very well put together, I think.
Definitely. And definitely, like, done by people who had a strong background in deep political machinations, then hypercharged via these really intense relationships with these foreign intelligence networks, combined with new, mass psychometric, psychographic warfare technology, political technology that was really, really for the first time, really rolled out in a mass scale with in 2016 with the hyper emphasis on Facebook, and then this key role of Twitter for Trump in terms of the rhetoric. And it's, you got to see Mike Pence either as you pointed out, profiles in cowardice, or something like, the ultimate, super cuck fantasy for, seditious snuff porn with a bit of crypto homoerotic overtones, or something like that, in terms of the role that Pence ultimately plays post January 6th.
Right, you're right. And that brings me, I want to circle back, Jeremy, and I got a lot I'm thinking with regards to this, but I do want to circle back to the conversation earlier when you brought up Maggie Haberman and the topic of the focus on the egotism, the focus on the personality, on the narcissism as like being the motivating factor, like really the only real important factor that you need to take into consideration, which obviously is so effective at limiting the scope of so many inquiries of investigation that are necessary, and just simply limiting it to the personality and, he does this because, this is just who he is. He's making these decisions himself just to advance his own personal ego, and there's no other major factors at play or whatever. So you just focus it on the individual and all this. But, like I was saying before, the personality is key. And we've talked about this, and the taking the personality and going back to what you talked about with MICE, with the acronym MICE, and I think Donald Trump kind of lines up pretty well with all four facets. Would you say, Jeremy, of the MICE acronym?
Well, it's interesting. I think ideology was always seen as the weakest.
Well, my ideology would be the weakest,
component. Right. But I think your larger point here, Greg, which I think is actually way more important than a micro level counterintelligence analysis of Trump, the asset per se, over time. But if you really see Trump as an agent of 11/9 global culture war, especially in terms of its weaponized, domestically destabilizing, and that's not just in the United States, but all around the world, that aspect of it, you can see Trump ideologically sort of resonates with that. And because also the other thing is that in particular around even the micro analysis of a good potential counterintelligence cultivar, of some sort in terms of mice. It's well known, especially from like Soviet intelligence days, that they were more wary of people who they would call fellow travelers, which would be people who could be cultivated because of an ideological resonance or solidarity or sympathy of some sort, because they were then seen as very dangerous to actually manage because they were always more pure. They would always sort of play a purity game. They would also then be much more dangerous in terms of potentially breaking away and then exposing the handling aspects of it. So Trump's weakness in terms of a low level of actual political ideology, in terms of as a specific, intelligence asset in terms of mice, actually seems so that he's the perfect, either useful idiot or cultivated asset, willing, unwilling, unknowing into a willing kind of asset, mainly based on money, compromise, corruption, or even called controversy in this case, and then
Yeah.
ultimately ego as the big payoff. Yeah.
Right. And Trump, in terms of ideology, he serves as like this. It's like been like this folk hero made out of Trump in terms of people who I think have been falsely led to believe for a number of reasons that he shares like, ideology in common with them in terms of like their idea what they fancy America to be, as far as like Trump's this ideological symbol of the country that they love and the great country that they love and grew up in, that is at risk of not being the great country that they know and love anymore. Like, somehow there's been a folk hero image made around Trump as being the person who's going to stand up for that. So I think, like, on one hand, like, not in terms of like any genuine ideological like leanings or allegiances, but in terms that there has been like this artificial kind of astroturfed idea of Trump as this ideological folk hero that represents the values and principles that made us great as a nation that we're losing now. In the eyes of many, I think some of the older, maybe more of your baby boomer type of Trump supporters, and maybe even people who followed that. But I think that that's a major resonance. So he becomes like this ideological folk hero.
That's a great point, because actually, if there is an ideology of the MAGA movement in terms of the way that you're talking about it, but the fronting of Trump as a folk hero, as a populist, obviously we've pointed out over and over, it's really a sort of faux populism. It's a play your ass kind of against the middle of the country populism. It's a weaponized populism, and it's really a proto-fascism under the guise of a populism. But if there is an ideology, it's not actually, there's no like actual, serious political philosophy behind it. It's really mainly resentment politics. And in that case, Trump is the sort of god of that
Oh
ideology.
yeah.
He really believes that. He really feels, he is like
Yeah.
the King Cyrus of revanchist politics.
And any crimes that he gets caught up in or gets even threatened to be held accountable for, he is able to turn it into an assault on 100 million people who just want the America they love back. I mean, it's very, very effective. It's super effective. And by the way, he sounds like your father or grandfather at the dinner table. Like, he's just saying common sense that Americans used to understand before they were brainwashed by all this liberalism.
Yeah, yeah.
So, getting back onto the point of the persona and of the focus on the ego, that's vitally important. When you take it in context with the bigger picture of this, of all of the intrigue that surrounds in so many ways of corruption and compromise and all of this that Trump and the 11/9 operation is up their eyeballs in on a bigger scale. You do have to deal with the persona and the personality, because he is a uniquely, in terms of certainly of our modern electoral politics on such a presidential level, is he likes to say, like nothing we've ever seen before. And in terms of personality, I certainly is, and that does need to be understood. And I've talked somewhat about this in the past. I want to talk more about this here, because there is an idea of a lot of people that have like this idea of, well, you have a you have a construct, a monolithic entity that wants to dominate the world, and all of these people work in symmetry with each other. There's this harmony among, or there may be different networks of people, but they're working for like some kind of bigger agenda that ultimately would be very similar or monolithic, serves a certain purpose or another. But I think that when you think about things that way, I think it's a bit flawed. And one reason why it's flawed is because you have to take individual personas into consideration. And the case of Donald Trump, like this is a person who certainly has a unique would be an understatement, personality as far as the people that have been president, that have been in the highest office in the land in our country, so to speak. And when you look at him, like he just can't just put that into the context of, okay, maybe he certainly serves bigger agendas that are at play to one level or another. Certainly, like Trump has been a perfect agent for certain interests, certainly in the early years and everything. And obviously, so much has been accomplished for certain these networks and interests of, like, say, that were central to the 11/9 operation. But also, Donald Trump is the things that made him uniquely serviceable to a certain agenda have also made him a wild card and a detriment to that. Like this egotism and the way he behaves, like, this is not I believe this is just how he's inclined to be, and this is he can't help himself but to behave in the way he does. Like when he goes on with Brett Baier on Fox News and says that all of the people who were in his administration who have ever criticized him, they're just cowards or gutless pigs, or they just want to make money off of me, or I would never have Mark Milley in a position to be in leadership when we're going to war. That's just stupid. This is just how the man is naturally I think wired to behave, and it is. And I think you have to look at this on a personal level. I guess I'm saying you can't lose sight of personalities and intrapersonal relationships and dynamics when it comes to these bigger picture things that are going on. But the personality is crucial, and you can see. I think now we're getting a picture of how Donald Trump, the person that he is, the uniquely egomaniacal, just all of the things that make him him, made him so perfect for what things we talk about here on the AnteDote around 11/9 and things that have happened geopolitically, things that have happened domestically as a result, but then also have made him a wild card and, dare I say, a liability with the specter of Trump 2024 still looming, and all of the people he's alienated, and and also as things begin to really come to a head, like in terms of this documents case and some of the things that were going on, there's still looming January 6th stuff with Georgia, the perfect phone call 2.0 to Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, and stuff around in D.C. as well. Like as these various walls begin to circle in and close in certain areas. Now, that's not to say that the needed accountability is going to happen in all these cases, because as we've talked about, there's still a lot of questions and uncertainty surrounding that for various reasons that has not gone away. And we'll talk more about that going forward. But as on a personal level, like the Trump persona, the Trump presidency, and the Trump political figure, like as certain walls begin to close in, like it's almost like an emperor has no clothes moment, I think, with the way that he behaves. Like, yes, he still has like his cult of hardcore followers that will just parrot and just love every single thing he says. But I think also with elements, there's a mask off, like you talk about the Trump ripping the mask off the ugliness of the American empire, some people would like to put it. But then I think on a personal level, the mask kind of comes off when he's vulnerable, and you just see no, this is not the person who, and I don't know if it's resonating as much as it needs to, but no, this is not the person who just wants to but this is a child who is just lashing out, and I think on a personal level, the mask comes off of that at the level of all the people he's alienated who have worked with him in all degrees of his cabinet and in important positions of authority and influence within the government, who were effective in various ways in advancing certain agendas. But because of the way this person is uniquely personally wired, has caused this alienation that has really put the future prospects for the things that that people would say that are favorable to this, what was accomplished and what could be accomplished going forward because of this person who was uniquely, I guess, I don't know if qualified is the right word, uniquely perfect for something like what was carried out.
The most perfect, Greg. The best.
Yes, absolutely. The best person for an operation like this in so many ways, with the personality traits that made him attractive to as a person to be put in the position of a presidency, now makes it a bigger and bigger problem as we go on here, is the question of what to do with him. And then I'll also tie in to somewhat put a bow on this bigger point I'm making here, and I hope it's making sense here, is you think about the personalities of the people who still, like I listened to Representative Adam Kinzinger on the Bulwark podcast. And the Bulwark is basically kind of the follow-up to the Weekly Standard, which went bankrupt. Bill Kristol, of course, published the Weekly Standard, and now has a primary role at this Bulwark website, which I look at as like the maybe to monitor the paleo neocons, the legit never Trump Republicans who we've called the paleo neocons. And Representative Adam Kinzinger, of course, is on the January 6th committee, was talking to Charlie Sykes, who's kind of maybe the Fred Barnes of the Bulwark, kind of Bill Kristol's right-hand man in some ways, was lamenting how he couldn't understand how some of his colleagues have just why they've changed so much. Elise Stefanik was mentioned. Surprised at Marco Rubio and Marco Rubio's fealty to Trump, and also head scratching about the way Kevin McCarthy's operating in certain ways. And so you've got this uniquely just wired individual who has alienated so many of like the people who worked with him. He burnt them basically because they weren't loyal enough to him, and it became like the bigger picture of like bigger policies, goals to be achieved, became secondary to this particular egomaniacal individual, to the belief that people have to be sufficiently loyal to him on a personal level, and it's caused this alienation. It's also the dynamics around Trump and 11/9 have brought a lot of other people who you've got brought like a Lindsey Graham, who at one point said, if he's the candidate, our party's going to be destroyed and we deserve it. Or the less critical Marco Rubio types that have coalesced around Trump and are now just all about defending him. Kevin, if there's two people who Putin owns, it's Trump and Rohrabacher. McCarthy now just spouting off all of the Trump defensive talking points in his role as a speaker. And the nature of like this 11/9 operation, I think the foreign I would say takeover of the Republican Party and of Republican politics by this very foreign centric operation has actually brought these people who in the past would have been very much and showed themselves to be in the past, the not so distant past of 2015, 2016, to be very distasteful to both the ugliness of Donald Trump's personality and also the agenda that he was representing and was laying out, have now just become his biggest backers. And it's a very fascinating, but I think it's important and instructive to understand of the both of the uniqueness of this individual personality that alienates so many people that were of service to the actual 11/9 operation that brought him into power, because they crossed him on a personal level or whatever. Think of Bill the coward, the pig Barr, and John Bolton, others. You can go on and on with the names, but then at the same time, the 11/9 operation that brought this person in has also brought people closer to him because of the nature of the operation, that were so in disgust of him and were so distasteful towards him and were so inclined to be against him at a time when really like a lot of the movers and shakers that I think are a good portion of them that were responsible, culpable, bringing Trump in the first place, would like to move on from him and wash their hands of him, are really not able to because of the new face of the Republican politics that has been taken over by this operation that brought Trump in.
Definitely, and there is a lot. I think there's a lot
I said a
important.
lot there.
No, and I think it's important, especially in terms of what the way that I would then categorize it is in terms of understanding that macro counterintelligence threat environment that continues, no matter what actually happens in relationship to these indictments, that, as you seem to hint, are not even done very likely, even the Jack Smith. This is just the Mar-a-Lago district indictment. It looks like there's still very likely a DC indictment looming, I would say. Now, it's not, I don't think it's guaranteed, but it looks like those are the two main prongs here. There's this sort of question of the documents and questions of espionage potential and obstruction. And then the other one relates to the fact that there have been a whole slew of people who have been found guilty of January 6th, a whole bunch of so-called oath keepers who have been now sentenced for seditious conspiracy. And it would not surprise me if it actually comes out that Trump himself is towards the center of that seditious conspiracy that the so-called oath keepers played their own role in, when he asked folks like them and the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
so that's still, no matter what actually happens with that, and whether Trump is able to even, move Teflon Don his way past all of this and run as some kind of pseudo populist, proto fascist, Eugene Debs from prison kind of operation.
Don't forget,
Yeah.
yeah, and also just a reminder, just don't forget Perfect Call 2.0 in Georgia also.
Right, and that's actually the sort of the main one that's the bigger state level charge, actually, right? Obviously, even beyond the New York prosecution, that could be very significant, especially in relationship to questions around electability or even legitimacy in terms of running for 2024. But no matter how that all shakes out in terms of Trump the person, Trump the personality, Trump the candidate this time around, you still have to deal with these larger, in the same way that we talk about macroeconomics, microeconomics. I think we need to look at it in terms of macro counterintelligence, micro counterintelligence threats, that these macro layer counterintelligence threats exist and persist way beyond the persona of Donald Trump, but are very well explained and must be analyzed as such, even in the ongoing cover up of some of the deeper dynamics of the actual 11/9 operation, how it's covered up via large aspects of the media, the total almost virtual silence on the Israeli component of the 11/9 operation, now beginning to bubble to the surface with a combination of Seth Abramson's Proof of Conspiracy book 2019 that brings in Netanyahu and the Red Sea conspiracy is central, on into James Bamford's spy fail and the large focus on Isaac Molho and Netanyahu, the more logistics of the actual Israeli, high-level Israeli operations in terms of Trump 2016, on into now the outing of Paul Singer, this key Israeli startup nation, vulture capitalist, doomsday investor type. Who, by the way, remember Paul Singer? And we'll cover more of this, the sort of deeper implications of the Paul Singer Alito ProPublica story in relationship to the origins, of course, of the Steele dossier, Durham's report. Now Jim Jordan's hosted a hearing with Durham in Congress just today, and what that all means in terms of the 11/9 cover-up. that's still there in the back room. But by the way, just to sort of close the circle on this social media moment, remember that it's Paul Singer and his Elliott Management Group that I really believe you got to say was at the epicenter of leveraging the clearing out for this Elon Musk takeover of Twitter to actually happen. Remember, it's Paul Singer in basically a hostile move, a takeover, sort of like a elbowing move at the board and Twitter, elbowed out the sort of the longer running what's his name?
Jack Dorsey.
Jack Dorsey administration at Twitter, you might call it, and then open that up, and then this sort of very milquetoast, very sort of like Indian centric, interesting sort of like this sort of very Indian national and security state related kind of administration that came in as a bridge, and then comes in Elon Musk and this David Sachs mob behind it, so trying to sort of renormalize Trump, but also push this even much more potentially effective Israeli-sponsored fascist type, I'd say woke warrior or culture warrior DeSantis directly into the heart of the Twitter sphere. So that's also in the background there with Paul Singer now being exposed. So that is more and more an escalation of the exposure, I would say, of the Israeli arm of the 11/9 operation, while there also being a muddying of the waters around everyone's role in all of that is easily done via the persona, as you point out, Greg, of Donald Trump himself, where it makes it the whole sort of gutless pig. Like that was even, that was directly quoted to Durham this morning in Congress by, I believe, Tennessee Congressman Stephen Cohen.
Yes.
Mr. Durham, Donald Trump has said that Bill Barr is a gutless pig and a rhino, and Donald Trump says he's a great judge of character. What do you have to say? Do you think Donald Trump is a great judge of character in terms of you were brought in under the Barr scenario? Do you think Bill Barr is a gutless pig? And so that then controversializes the actual sort of deeper thing going on here with Barr being this crucial cover-up of the 11/9 operation, the landing of the Rod Rosenstein plane, the Epstein-Maxwell cover-up, obviously, and then on into this Durham operation. So that then controversializes all of that, and then Durham gets to make his little sort of, tough little, funny little joke about that was not in the scope of my report, and that was sort of like his humorous moment there. And it was a funny moment, but it also sort of pointed out that was the Roy Cohn's moment in the middle of all of this. Trump calling Barr a gutless pig, while the entirety of the Israeli background, even of the Steele dossier to some extent, if you hook it back into Paul Singer, of course, continues to be covered up, along with the deeper Russian component of the 11/9 operation.
That's a great point you bring up with we'll start to wrap up here, but that's a great point you bring up with the Paul Singer, Elliott Management, and Twitter, and the role in the overhauling of Twitter. And it's interesting that they're so then really putting out the attempt to mass market Ron DeSantis, who of the candidates other than Trump, and certainly much more from a much more stable governmental way of looking at things, without the politics, the political agenda, without all of the traits that make Trump Trump. Ron DeSantis, I think, would be the most friendliest to this, to the continuity of this overhauling, with the types of relationships that Singer has with the Federalist Society that's coming out now, Sam Alito, and a bridging together of like the further post-Trump, hopefully, I think a lot of these people's views are post-Trump, post 11/9 level of this, that brings it together with like whatever the bigger multinational global agenda that the Elon Musk David Sachs network has. I think it makes sense if you look at it from that regard. And I was just going to clarify, just like I put a bit of like a one final follow up on the conversation about Trump the person is that yes, absolutely, like Trump could go to prison tomorrow and like his campaign could be over and like hypothetically, and this is going to carry on because of the takeover. At least there's going to be a continued battle to wage it on what all that's come of it because of the takeover of the GOP party politics at the all the way through in terms of Congress, certainly, and also obviously at the state level, even potentially even more effectively, more severely waged battle. But to follow up on the conversation from earlier, my point from earlier is that Trump, the unique persona of Donald Trump, the blessing and the curse, and that the people who want to move on, you haven't found anybody else that can be Trump. The things that make Trump Trump, like that make him a liability. Also, there's still those elements of that persona and of the that are still they're still desirable to have. But as far as like the politicians that are yearning to challenge him in the 2024 primary, there's not another Trump in there. There's no one even close to it. Like we've talked about, like Ron DeSantis, just my belief is he doesn't have the chops, and like these other candidates don't either. So while there's this the problematic elements, the one thing that has made him more attractive to some of these people who in the past thought have inclined them to be more supportive of him, who were in the past were so did not like him and were so critical of him in the past because of the shaping and because of the trajectory of the GOP since 11/9. Also, though, it's a big part of that is because you truly can't wash your hands of the symbol of all of this, of the most powerful force in all of this, as long as there's no one else that's coming up on a national level to replace him. And that's a big part of the dilemma that's at place now, is like there's just no one that's come along that could really replicate or carry on like all that Trump did on a national level with this operation. And that's and so as long as that's the case, like people within the body politic who you need to maybe come out and condemn him or move or really express a desire, like a forthright desire to move on once and for all in the Senate, in the halls of Congress, are not going to do so. And I think a big part of that is because there's not that, from the personality trait of a less toxic replacement for that, has just not been found.
I think that's true. And, alongside all of these there's a lot of groundbreaking kind of, revelations, but also these, Department of Justice indictments, including the Hunter Biden. That's a first for the country too, in terms, especially like a sitting president's son, federally indicted in terms of taxes and weapon possession. And of course, the MAGA folks will say this is the cover up of all the worst stuff and all that. But meanwhile, just that on the surface is that is also groundbreaking, alongside the Trump indictment and the exposure of these Supreme Court justices that continues to happen. But I agree with you, Greg. I think that, and this is a little bit of my, my hopeful assessment of my that I continue to see, that I get the sense that both Trump and DeSantis, it's a Finkelstein kind of controversy. That both of them.
Well, let's just call him DeSanctimonious.
DeSanctimonious, the most perfectly DeSanctimonious, yeah. And his wife, Jill Black, is that her name? I can't remember her name. Yeah, that's her actual name. And I think that both of them still look to me like they both are. They're the two most dangerous, I believe,
yes,
candidates that the Republicans have. And I believe that they're both heading down. And very ironically, it looks to me like DeSantis turns out to be maybe the Ted Cruz of 2024, where Ted Cruz sort of looked good on paper to the Tea Party and the MAGA types. But when you actually get him out in person, IRL and all of that, He's too weird. He's too non-personal. There's too much. He's not a good retail politician. That's a DeSantis. He withers under the gaze and the light of the public recognition and the palm pressing and all of that. He doesn't have that aspect. And then even more ironically, I think you got to see Trump ends up being the low energy Jeb Bush. In this case, actually, if you see his interview with Brett Baer, he's the low courage Jeb Bush of the 2024 election, where he's beginning to show bits of fear that the Teflon Don coating is beginning to chip away.
Yep, he's still Trump, but he's wounded, and that mask of comes off of him in certain ways. But there's still the dilemma of not being able to replicate that. I guess the magic in a bottle that you had with Trump that made him so effective in the first place, with someone less toxic without all of the maybe more politically inclined, that doesn't come with all of the basically the charisma that could be used to be the messenger of this agenda on a national level and a national electoral level, has just not been found, and is not there with the people that are being pushed for 2024 on the Republican side.
Yes, and so there are these aspects of where really am beginning to see aspects of the body politics immune system. It seems to be kicking in, and all of the destabilization and the chaos warfare continues to be thrown at us. Is the worst case scenarios are not panning out for those political nemesis who would seek total chaos and destabilization. Even in terms of the response to the Trump indictment, there was some good. They had their protests and all of that, and meanwhile, we didn't have civil war pop off and a follow up, a more amplified follow up to January 6th. And so there are inklings of the body politic, not just here in the United States, but more internationally, also beginning to rebuild its gut. Remember that the immune system really can begin in the gut. So we're rebuilding our guts in terms of the body politics, and that is not only in relationship to guts as courage, but it's also gut instinct, our ability to have a sense of discernment in terms of these con jobs, these con men, these con women who are thrown at us, these con ops, these mass con ops in terms of culture war dynamics and all of that that seek to destabilize, divide, and conquer us. I think are more and more. There's possibility here that we will gain our guts and then our feet again, and then be able to deal with our big planetary scale, national level, civilizational scale, real deal, human ecological, political, economic problems that really face the entire planet to some extent. So there's luckily we had no more time to lose, but we may have begin to recover our guts just in the nick of time. And so we will see. And so there's a lot more to deal with that I think we'll deal with next time. That includes then, what is all behind the question of, is RFK Jr.'s actual now articulated stance on Israel-Palestine as he gave it to Glenn Greenwald? Is this just the sort of Democratic Party's version of the Mike Pence profiles and cowardice? Or is there something else going on here in terms of RFK Jr. basically just spouting off straight up Israeli intelligence, Hasbara talking points, basically advocating for the new anti-Semitism, even as the Biden administration, we're in the wake of it deciding not to have the big wedding with the IHRA, new anti-Semitism definition. The Biden administration ultimately decided not to have the big wedding with the new anti-Semitism, the Sharonskys and the Lipstats and the whole Wexner, networks sponsorship of that over many decades. But RFK Jr. is here pushing it on Glenn Greenwald as his de facto position. So there's all of that we could then get back into the question of the Steele dossier, the
Yes.
PP tapes, what all is actually being covered up here, what is sort of disinformation, what might be true, and then how all of that might then link back into Epstein Maxwell and the question of John Mark Dugan in Russia, 2013, early 2013. Look at 2013, Trump in Russia, John Mark Dugan in Russia.
Yes.
John Mark Dugan, who was given access to the DVDs, the Epstein Maxwell Compromat video DVDs. He's then in Russia meeting with like the guy who helped install Putin, who Putin kept in power, overlooking basically $1 trillion of Russian national real estate and mineral assets and all of these kinds of things. Pavel Borodin, while John Mark Dugan was allegedly there just to sort of meet a Russian potential wife that he met online or something like that. And then ultimately early 2016, where is Trump early 2016? Where is Arthur Finkelstein early 2016? Well, John Mark Dugan that's when he's then raided and then runs to Russia for good and ends up on TV with people like Daria Dugina. He's in the Ukraine theater doing his thing. RT is celebrating him. So is the actual potential, cover up of the Steele dossier in terms of the PP tape, is that just a dog whistle toward, oh yeah, Putin, the Kremlin acquired the Epstein Maxwell compromat tapes, and that dog whistle will be heard by the Clintons and the Trumps both, as well as many other high level people all around the world. So that will then allow us to unpack some of what's still being covered up in terms of Durham and all of these 11/9 reports.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for listening to us, and we'll be back with that very soon.
All right, very good. Thank you very much, Greg, for this. Good to get back into it with you. And thank you, everybody out there. We appreciate you. Until next time, AnteDote, we are out.